Welcome, everybody, to the Legends of Hoosier Hysteria on the Gruely True Sports Network. I am your host for the Legends of Hoosier Hysteria, Mike Goodpaster. And for our first show, I figured we might as well have the biggest legend in Indiana high school basketball history. Help me welcome from the 1954 state champion Milan Indians, Bobby Plump. How you doing, sir?
Mike, I'm doing very well. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and it's sectional time. So I figured maybe we give some of these young ones a little history lesson and kind of what this used to be. And the thing that struck me is I grew up in the 70s in Aurora, and there was a basketball court, I think, at almost every house. People played day and night, and you played with your friends constantly. So my first question is, I'm sure it was like that for you growing up around Milan in the late 40s, and I would assume, because I've seen pictures with you and a few of your teammates when you guys were younger, all playing together, and I assume that had a lot to do with your success.
Well, I guess it had something to do with our success. Actually, there wasn't very much to do except play athletics, and we grew up with goals hanging as high as we could get them. We had a smokehouse. I lived in Pierceville, by the way, 3 miles from Milan, as you well know.
Yeah.
And my father gave me a goal, a backboard, and a basketball when I was maybe the third or fourth grade. We hung it up on a smokehouse, and we started playing there. And then Schroeder's store had a bigger place, and we would play baseball in the summertime when we're not in school. We'd play baseball till it got dark, and then we'd play basketball till it was time to go to bed. And the young people today have to understand there wasn't anything to do. I mean, nobody had any money. We didn't. I lived in Pierceville, as I told you. We didn't have electricity till I was 13. Never had a telephone. When I graduated from high school, they had to call Schroeder's store, and he came over. Roger, who played with me, he came over, and I had to call him back to find out I was Mr. Basketball. So there wasn't much going on, and playing athletics was part of it. In Pierceville, we had a midnight requisition of one of the road graders, and a farmer gave us part of his cornfield, and we built a baseball diamond and then parked the road grader back under the tree. And unfortunately, the guy that drove it, Lloyd Freeman, forgot to take the emergency brake off, and he burned the emergency brake out, but they didn't do anything to him. So we had a baseball team in Pierceville at that time. It was fun. I mean, we didn't know any better.
Yeah, you were playing PlayStation for 12 hours a day. You were actually playing baseball or basketball. And you grew up at a time where, especially high school-wise, the 50s, I think, was the golden era of Indiana high school basketball. You had Milan, you had Oscar Robinson and Crispus Attucks and what they did there. So when you guys got to junior high, was this one of those things where you guys knew that you had something special with that team?
No, we didn't know that. We didn't know that when we won the state, Mike. It was never talked about. Just so the younger people can understand something, in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, every gymnasium was full that we played in the 50s. I mean, we had to, my family, I was the last of 6 kids, and my family had to go to neighboring communities to find tickets, because once you win the sectional, and even at the sectional, they had a drawing of season ticket holders, and if your name wasn't drawn out, you didn't get a ticket. They probably in '54, that was the first statewide television of the tournament. It had been televised 2 years before, but we probably drew 800, 900,000 to the tournament, and people couldn't get in to the gymnasium. we played our regional at Rushville. Milan had never won a game in the regional, by the way, until 1953, when they fired the coach that we thought was a great guy, and he was
Coach
a great
Grinstead.
guy.
Yeah.
Yep. And we go to the regional that seated, I don't know, 4,000 or so, and it was packed. My family had to go to some other cities to find tickets. Semi-state played in Hinkle Fieldhouse, 15,000. It was packed. They had to go find tickets someplace. In 1954, we have a restaurant in Indianapolis called, of all things, Plump's Last Shot. Here's Hinkle Fieldhouse, seating 15,000. Tickets were $3.50. You saw two games that morning, that Saturday morning, and the champions played that night. There are people that come in there and say they paid $25 scalping tickets to get into that final game, and it was statewide television. So and we started drawing 1 million people to our state tournament in 56, 57, and we were still drawing 850,000 in 1997 when they changed to the multi-class. But the interest was, Milan seated 1,000. We had 1,000 season ticket holders. There were only 1,100 people in our town. We only played 4 games at home our junior and senior years because Versailles built a 2,000-seat gymnasium, and we used that.
Oh, was that Tyson Auditorium?
All of our home games. Pardon me?
Was that Tyson Auditorium?
Yes.
Okay.
And the reason they built it was so they could get the sectional because it was a moneymaker.
Yeah, and I remember when I was younger, almost every school that built a gym, they would try to build it the biggest gym in the county so they could get the sectional.
Absolutely, because they could make a lot of money doing it. And Gus Moorhead, by the way, was a coach at Versailles at the time, now South Ripley. And I got to know him real well. I've done a couple of speeches for him, and he said the biggest mistake I ever made was letting you guys use that gymnasium. Hell, that was your home gym. We beat them 7 times our junior and senior year, and he said I should never have done that.
Yeah, and would it be safe to say that when you got to high school, it wasn't really winning the state championship you guys were thinking about, it was winning the Ripley County tournament every year?
Absolutely. We never talked about winning a state tournament. We never talked. Being the county champion was the be-all, end-all in the basketball in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Even when you were in school, the county champion was still a prize. That we got a trophy. If you won 3 in a row, we had a trophy called Vic. It was a lion. You got to keep it forever. And when you won the tournament, county tourney, you got it for that year. And then if you won it 3 in a row, you got it. Even when we won the sectional in 53, when we won the semi-state in 53, after having never won a game in the regional, and we go to the state tournament and we got beaten in the morning game by South Bend. They beat us pretty handily, and then they won that night. We never once talked about winning the state tournament all during the next season. Even going through the tournament, we never talked about it until we played Crispus Attucks with Oscar Robertson and beat them 65-52 using the 4-corner offense, by the way, that Marvin Wood brought to Milan, and we used it as an offensive weapon. And after the game, a bunch of it, Engel, Truitt, myself, Schroeder, White, and Kraft, I think we were sitting around, and we said, you know what? Last year when we got beat in the morning game, you didn't get a souvenir. You had to get to the final game, and the champions got gold rings, and the runners-up got silver rings. We sat there, we said, you know what? We got to win that game next Saturday to get to the final game so we can get a memento.
Yeah. And
that was the first time that anything was mentioned about winning or getting to the state finals.
All right, now you
Woody
talked
never
about
talked about it. He never talked about it during our coach.
yeah, and you mentioned Coach Wood. He was a guy that came in, I think, what before your sophomore or junior year?
He came at the end of our sophomore year, and he there were 7 seniors. You could dress 10, and had 2 alternates for the tournament. There were 7 of us that were seniors that year. Obviously, as sophomores, there were 7 of us that were sophomores. Mr. Grinstead had 7 seniors on the ball club. We were playing B team or whatever they called it.
Yeah.
We knew we weren't on the varsity. Some of us got a dress when for the varsity, and we were 20-20 men. We got ahead when we were 20 ahead or 20 behind, and Mr. Grinstead, the first game we lost to Rising Sun. The second game, we're playing Osgood, our county rival, and they've got us down 20 points at halftime. Mr. Grinstead comes in at halftime and told the 7 seniors, if you don't come back and win this game, I'm going to take your uniforms. Well, it's the second game of the season. That's unheard of. You don't do that. We got beat 82-44. He took 7 seniors' uniforms and dropped them on the table and kicked them off the team. Now, coaches are pretty smart. He brought the 2 best ball players back, Bergman and Brandis, moved myself and Bob Engel the starting 5. We beat Batesville the next game, hadn't defeated them in 9 years. Had the best season Milan ever had. 3 of us had the flu going into the sectional, and Batesville beat us. And the superintendent, I mean, we're coming back. All 7 of us are coming back. And the superintendent fired Mr. Grinstead.
Did he fire him because of that?
Well, he fired him. Nobody knows why. He said he fired him because he ordered uniforms and didn't have any money in the budget. Mr. Grinstead called a meeting of the whole school and said, I offered to pay for them out of my pocket. I mean, we needed them. We had holes in the other uniform. But he fired him, and here they hired a 24-year-old guy, Marvin Wood, only coached 2 years, had a 50-50 record. And think of this. Mr. Grinstead is living in Milan, coaching at Moores Hill. 3 miles away. His wife had a beauty parlor in Milan. Here comes this young coach in, and Mr. Grinstead always went to Arkenberg's, and they had their coffee cups at downtown coaches. Woody never went there. There was a movement, and Woody finally closed practice. That was unheard of, too. There was a movement to get rid of him and get Mr. Grinstead back, and obviously we won. After we won the first 5 ball games, you couldn't find anybody that criticized Marvin Wood. But there was a movement to get rid of him and get Grinstead back. Fortunately, that didn't happen.
Yeah, and Coach Wood seems, for everything I read of him, was more of like a team-first philosophy. And I've heard a story about you, Bobby, New Year's Eve, 1953-54.
That's the only mistake Marvin Wood ever made in his coaching career, Mike. You know, we knew who was training and who wasn't, and I thought it was such an honor even to sit on the bench as a varsity player. I trained, man, but he called a meeting before New Year's Eve. There were 2 or 3 of the players that were going to E-Town. They could buy beer up there and so forth.
Yeah, it's across the state line in Ohio, right?
Yep. Elizabethtown, yeah. And he called a meeting before New Year's Eve, the last practice we had, and he said, fellas, I want all of you to have a nice time on New Year's Eve. I want you to see the new year in. And we had hours. We had to be in by midnight on weekends and 10 o'clock during the week. And weekends were Saturday and Sunday. And he said, I'll extend the hours and you can stay out till 1 a.m. Well, I had a double date. Bill Rayner had a car, lived in Pierceville, and we allowed just enough time to get back to my house. Honest to God, we had a flat tire. It is true. We changed that tire about as quickly as anybody outside the 500-mile race, pulled up in front of our house, maybe it was 3 or 4 minutes to 1, and I don't know. We stayed out in the car. We were probably studying, doing all that. And here Woody comes. I saw Woody drive by, and I said, "Well, maybe I should run it out." I said, "No, I'm here. I'm sitting right here." He got out. I got out. He said, "What time you got, Bob?" And I said, "I got 1 o'clock." He said, "I got 5 after 1, and we're going by my." I said, "We had a flat tire. Feel it. It's still hot." He said, "You should have planned for it," and drove off. Never said anything the next 3 practices. At the last practice before we played Napoleon, he asked me to come in early, and I came down, sat on the bench, and he said, "Bob, I think I need to make an example out of you. You can't play tonight. You can't sit on the bench. You're in the stands." I go in the stands. 10 minutes later, Jim Wyndham, our starting center, he was a year ahead of us, came up. I said, "Jim, what are you doing here?" He said, "He got me at 3 o'clock, Bob." 3 o'clock? He said, "Yeah, I tried telling him I was taking a babysitter home, but that didn't work." Here, it's the starting guard, starting center, sitting in our bleachers, and they beat Napoleon 14 points without us. Now, he told us that we were going to be kicked off for 3 games. Well, the next game after that, maybe it was a second game after that or whatever, was a county tourney. And Woody didn't want both of us. He was surprised that he said, "Bob, I drove by your house first. I knew you were going to be in." And I said, "I was going by everybody's house." And so instead of 3 games, the next day at practice, he said, "Bob, you and Jim, if you run 100 laps, and I'll have the student manager count them off, when you run 100 laps, you can come back on the team." So he let us back on the team. We won the county tourney and went on our way.
Now, did you actually run 100 laps?
Absolutely. We ran 100 laps.
All right.
We would have run 500 if we had.
The 1954 season, you guys lost 2 games during the regular season to Frankfurt and to Aurora. What stands out most to you about that season?
In 54?
Yeah.
Well, obviously what stands out most is the fact that we won the state tournament. But
I mean, regular season going up to it.
Oh, well, here's Milan, and we're playing in the Frankfurt Invitational Tournament, and that included all schools bigger than us: Fort Wayne North, Frankfurt, Columbus, and Milan. And we beat Columbus in the first game, and then the second game we're playing Frankfurt. And what stands out in that, they beat us in overtime, I think it was, or maybe 2 points. I forget what it was. But I was driving on to the bucket, and their center, Ohm, I think was his name, turned his back and bent over, and I went over him. Okay, and my feet hit it. They called a foul on me. And that was my 5th foul. I remember that game for sure. That was a close game. And then Aurora beat us the last game of the season. We played in their gym, and they had a zone defense, and they had a track running up above the floor. You couldn't shoot from the corners. But in any event, they beat us. And the rest of the season, we won pretty handily. As I mentioned, we played Versailles 3 times and beat them as sophomores. We beat them 4 times as seniors. So we never talked about the success that we had. We never talked about winning games. Woody kept everything on an even keel. And this will be hard for even you to believe from the 70s when you were going to school. We did not know our average points per game, our free throw percentage, or our field goal percentage. When we went through the tournament as juniors, they kept asking Woody about it, and he wouldn't give them anything. Finally, our senior year, we're going to go to the semi-state, and they had reporters and TV stations around, and they asked Woody, "Who's the leading scorer?" And he said, "That's not important." And they said, "Well, what about free throw, field goal percentage? And one guy said, well, don't you have statistics? And he said, yep, got them. He said, well, what are they? He says, they're good enough.
That's good enough.
That was his answer.
All right.
That was his answer. We did not know. The first time I knew my average points per game was after we won the tournament. They went to the IHSAA. It was the first time an all-star game was sanctioned by the IHSAA other than Indiana-Kentucky all-star game, and it was Ripley County against Tri-County. And they published the average points per game, the free throw, field goal percentage. I think I averaged something like 15.2, and Kraft was 7.8, and Engel was 7.6, and Truitt was 7.2, White was 5.6 or something like that. That's the first time we ever knew them. Now, we had a weekly paper. We obviously looked in the paper and see how well we did. But Woody just didn't. We never even thought about it. And you think about, well, if you don't know your percentages, you're not worried about missing a free throw and ruining your percentage or field goal or anything. I mean, Woody was smart beyond his years.
Yeah. Sounds like it. And then the sectional, you guys pretty much ran away with in Versailles. The regional, you blew out Rushville, which was a much bigger school, I assume, at the time. Then you played Aurora, the team that had beaten you at the end of the season. Aurora had a big man by the name of Bob Behrman, who I think ended up playing at Purdue. And
yes, he did.
Just from looking at this, Aurora seems to be one of the better teams you played that year.
They had maybe the best talent of any team we played. Fairman was center. Gabbard was a forward. Klingelhofer was a forward. Gabbard went to Eastern Tennessee, I think. Klingelhofer went to Michigan State, hurt his knee and didn't have a chance to play. For some reason they slipped my mind. One of the guards went to Hanover and played, and the other one, they had a service station there in Aurora. He didn't go to college, but they were extremely good. They had us down at halftime, and we were behind, I think, 6 or 8 points in the second half, and Engel and Truitt got hot. Man, they were throwing them in from every place. They brought us back, and before Aurora called timeout, we got the lead. And then we went into our four corners, and we were quick. And once we got ahead of a team in a tournament game, our junior year and senior year, and went into the four-corner offense, no team came back and got ahead of us, except in 53 South Bend Central. We never got ahead of them. And then Muncie Central, the only reason that score was so low. See, we beat Addicts, as I said, 65-52 using the four-corner offense. We beat Gersmar in the morning game of the state tournament 60-48 using the four-corner offense. We were ahead of Attic 6 points at halftime, extended it to 65-52. We were ahead of Muncie 6 points at halftime, 23-17. Going into the fourth quarter, the score was 28-26, and they're ahead of us. We score 3, they score 11. So Woody said, we're going to hold the ball. I get across the 10-second line, and we're down 2 points. 15,000 fans are standing screaming their heads off, and I stood there for 4 minutes and 17 seconds, and nobody moved. Bob Collins, the sports writer of the Indianapolis Star, said it was the most exciting 4 minutes and 17 seconds he's ever seen. There wasn't any action on the court. They asked Woody after it was over, said, what in the world was in your mind? You get that Plump kid standing out there 4 minutes and 17 seconds. You're behind 28-26. Final game, most important game of the year. He said, I was trying to think of something to do.
Yeah, but you beat the Aurora team, and then in the semi-state, the one thing that interests me is I wrote an article about Montezuma, who was known as the Gymless Wonders. This was a school that was even significantly smaller than Milan that went 23-5 that year. You also played against Crispus Attucks with Oscar Robertson. You want to talk a little bit about that semi-state? Because I think people miss that a lot, because Oscar Robertson was a guy that I think after that loss only lost one more game the rest of his high school career against Connorsville.
The next 2 years, that is correct. They were the Crispus Attucks was the first team, first black team in the nation to win a state tournament in 55. In 56, they were the first team in Indiana to go undefeated and win a tournament.
Weren't they the first team from
Montezuma.
Indianapolis to get there, too?
Pardon me?
Weren't they the first team from Indianapolis to get there also?
To win a state tournament,
Yeah.
Tech had been in the state tournament
Yeah.
in 52 with Joe Sexton before that, but they got beat. They were the first team in Indianapolis to win a state tournament, yes. And then Washington in 64, and then McGinnis in 69. But Montezuma, you mentioned them. It's still a record. Those, until they changed to the multi-class tournament, people say, what do you think of the class tournament? And I say, I loved it. That's what we had before we went to multi-class. But in any event, Montezuma and Milan still hold the record for the two smallest schools ever to play in a semi-state game.
Yeah, and they actually, after falling way behind early on, gave you guys a lot of trouble. I think you ended up beating them by like 10 points. And
Yep.
I think
We
Ronnie
beat it
Bauman.
by 10, but it was
Yeah.
closer than that.
Yeah.
They
And
had a great ball club. In fact, one of their players, Vic Edwards, was a fraternity brother of mine and was on the team at Butler when I went to Butler.
yeah, and the thing that I remember about that was they kind of screwed up because they made the ill-fated mistake of kind of sitting back and not really trying to attack your cat and mouse offense.
Yeah, well, a lot of people did that. A lot of times they did that. But even when they attacked it, I mean, Addicts tried to attack our cat and mouse offense, and we extended the lead against them. I mean, they pressed us all over the court. They had three different guys guarding me. Oscar likes me. I had 28, and Oscar only had 22. I don't tell people he was only a sophomore, though.
Hey, it doesn't matter if he was 12. Oscar Robertson is one of the greatest players that ever lived.
I'm going to tell you something. If you ever saw him play, you would know in the first 2 minutes of the game that he was awfully good.
Yeah.
And
Did
you're
you guys
right.
know going in he was that good?
No, we did not. I had seen Addicts play, but not with Oscar. I saw them against Batesville. I think it was in 51 with Willie Gardner. And Bobby Leonard said he thought Willie Gardner had as much, if not more, talent than Oscar, but he only played 1 year. But we didn't know about Oscar until the scouting report. Clarence Kelly was our assistant coach. The first time Milan had an assistant coach, by the way, our junior and senior years. And he was an excellent scout. And he brought down the scouting report, and we knew he was good. We didn't realize that he was that good, but we knew he was good.
Yeah, and then what was that week before going to Hinkle Fieldhouse to play in the Final Four against Terre Haute Gersmeyer? I mean, what was that like? That had to be one of the most exciting times of anybody's life. I mean, you watch the movie Hoosiers, and we'll talk about Hoosiers in a little bit, but I think the one thing about that movie, it really personified what it was like until they screwed up and went away and went to class basketball. I mean, the excitement in Milan had to be through the roof.
Let me correct you there a second. They went to multi-class basketball. We had class basketball.
Well, yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, until they screwed up the tournament. Because I know this. I grew up in the 70s, and Aurora had a team led by Tim Johnson and Rick Ampton in 1977 that went and upset the big school Lawrence Central in the Sweet 16, came up a little short in the Final 8. But I remember what it was like around Aurora and at school, even though I was only in like third or fourth grade at the time. And I could just imagine that was magnified probably 100 times over that week leading up to the Final Four for you guys.
Oh, at least 100 times over. I mean, there were TV people that were coming down to Milan, newspaper reporters. There were calls all the time. It was to say it was exciting is an understatement. But again, Woody kept us away mostly from all of that publicity. In fact, the semi-state and state was played at Hinkle Fieldhouse both years. And the teams, there were only two hotels in Indianapolis, two major hotels, the Claypool and the Lincoln. They were right across from each other, right downtown Indianapolis. We didn't stay there. We stayed at the old Pennsylvania Hotel, which was a 3-story hotel, 10 blocks north on Pennsylvania Avenue. And I asked Woody after I came back from Oklahoma playing, and I lived next door to him for 9. I said, Woody, how come we stayed up there and everybody was down, all the other teams and the fans and everybody were downtown? He said, Bob, I didn't want you guys around those fans telling you how good you were. Think about that. That's pretty smart. But there was a lot of publicity, and we enjoyed it. I mean, it was fun, but it never got in the way of our practices. It never got in the way of preparation for games. Woody handled most of that and kept us away from it. But again, you couldn't get tickets for any of the games regular season, and it was more difficult sectional, regional, semi-state, and state. It isn't like today where you can go walk in and get a ticket whenever you want to go. You had to have, if you weren't a member of a school or lived in that community where you're in the tournament and things, someday you had to have some special connections to get tickets to go to the state finals. And that existed even in the 70s and 80s. It's hard to explain today to the kids the excitement and what basketball meant to Indiana.
Yeah.
There were no professional sports, major professional sports, Indianapolis Indians, but that was a minor league team. The TV contract, even in 1997, when they changed to the multi-class, the TV station was paying the Indiana High School Athletic Association $500,000 a year, basically to televise the basketball tournament. Now, they televised the other sports, but it was basketball that brought in the money. The year they changed to the multi-class, there were 2 more years to run after that first year, and they canceled the TV contract. Nobody was interested. The IHSAA sent out to every TV station in Indiana and asked them to bid on televising the state tournament. No station replied. A TV station out of Noblesville picked it up for $45,000 a year compared to the $500,000 that it was before. I got off the track there. So you were talking about excitement in 53 and 54.
Yeah, the excitement. And then you played Terre Haute Gersmeyer, who had a great player in Arlie Andrews, who you guys held to 9 points.
Well, Arlie, and the year before, they lost the state championship game to South Bend Central, who beat us in the afternoon. They lost by 1 point. And that year they had Harley, Arlie, and Uncle Harold Andrews. Harley and Arlie were twins. And you're right. I didn't realize we held him to 9 points. I know we didn't score very much. He became a good friend of mine, he and Harley both. And he said, Howard Sharp was the coach. Yeah. And Sharpie thought he knew more basketball than any coach had ever lived. And we had defeated the year before, as we talked, we defeated Crispus Attucks. And back then they had a Final Four banquet. Now it's the Final Eight, but the Final Four banquet. And it was hard to get tickets to that also. But as juniors, we were there. They always interviewed the 4 coaches. And our senior year, Sharpie's up there, and they asked Sharpie the question, what are you going to do to this Milan team? They got that offense and things. And Sharpie said, well, I've got this thing worked out. I've got that offense. I've got this, and I've got that. And he talked for a couple of minutes. And Ray Crow, who coached Addicts when we beat them, was out in the audience. He held his hand up. And the announcer said, Mr. Crow, you have something to say? And he said, yeah, Sharpie, what are you going to do when you can't get the ball? Arlie said his offense was to put the best player in the middle at the free throw line. And I said, Arlie, why would he do that? We played a zone. That's all we played. I mean, we couldn't have put him in a better place for us to defend. And Arlie said, yeah, that's right. I kept telling him in the huddle, I got to get out and do it. But anyway, that's another story. They were a great ball club.
Now, were you guys the first game of the day or the second game?
We played the second. I don't remember. I think we played maybe the second game.
Okay, so after that second game. Go ahead. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's the other thing. Going back to Marvin Wood and how smart he was. Again, we had rooms at the Pennsylvania Hotel. We didn't go back to the hotel after our game. We stayed at a fraternity house on campus at Butler, which gave us probably an extra hour of rest and things, and that was Woody's idea.
Yeah, that was my question, what you did in the meantime.
Well, I think the year before, I don't remember whether the year before we stayed at the fraternity. What we did was go back and rest. We had a meal and we'd lay down, and I don't think we slept, but we rested. And the year before, I can't remember, but I know our senior year we stayed out at Butler Fieldhouse to save that driving time back and forth.
Now, it's impossible to take a nap before you play the state championship game, right?
I would think so. Yeah.
So you get to the championship game, and I've asked a lot of people this before that were underdogs going into games. Did you feel like an underdog going into this game?
We never. I can't remember feeling one way or the other. We never talked about.
You just think you're going to win the
like
game.
An underdog. I know that we never felt like we were an underdog in any game we played from the time we were in grade school.
Yeah.
And we learned a great lesson in grade school, by the way. And it may not seem important to the people that are listening, but here's what happened. Our seventh and eighth grade team, we won the county tourney, grade school. Our eighth grade, we were undefeated. We beat every team in our county handily. The first game of the grade school tournament, Mark Combs was our coach, and then he was the trainer on our team. He's in all the pictures. When we won the championship, we got beat by Osgood, and we had defeated them twice during the season. And, man, we're down in our dressing room crying our eyes out, and I'll never forget it. He came down and he said, fellas, I know that you feel badly, and I understand you're upset, and I understand the crying, but if you never remember anything else I've told you, please remember this. Never, never, ever walk on the basketball court thinking just for showing up you're going to win.
Yeah.
Think about that. We learned it when we were young. Sometimes you learn that too late when you're in high school or even later. A great lesson. I mean, we were devastated. But from that point on, we never went into a game thinking that we were going to be defeated, ever after that. We never went into a game thinking we were automatically going to win either.
Yeah.
It just wasn't there.
Well, and you get to that state championship game. They hit a bucket or two early. I think they're up 3-0 right away. Ray Kraft step up, hits a couple shots, and Ray Kraft played really well in that championship game.
Actually, that game is the worst game I played in 2 years of tournament play. I had 81 points in the final 4 games, and I had 6 until I made the last 4 points. It was the worst game I played in 2 years of tournament play, honest. Ray had 10 points at halftime, and they took the guy out that was guarding him, Phil Razor, and never put him back in. Leon Aguilano came in, and Ray got 4 points in the second half. But Ray was a leading scorer in that final game. And without him, we wouldn't have been in the ball game. But we were ahead, as I said, 23-17 at half, mainly due to Ray Kraft.
Yeah, and you guys were up 8 points for a lot of that last 4 or 5 minutes of the first half also.
Yeah, we ended up being up 6 points at the end of it.
Yeah.
And the same amount that we were up against Addicts, and we extended it to 65-52. Muncie Central was the only team that came back on us after we got ahead and went into the four-corner offense. And that's why the score was so low, because we held the ball for 4 minutes and 17 seconds when we were behind 2 points. And it was Ray Kraft also hit a bucket to tie it up 28-28.
Yeah, and I think you had a couple free throws to tie it at 30, didn't you?
Well, I hit 2 free throws to go up 30-28.
Okay.
We got the ball back. I forget whether we stole it or whether we got a rebound, and we weren't supposed to shoot. Woody said, hey, they got to foul us if they get, as long as we don't make a mistake. And if we hit our free throws, whether we win by 2 or 4 doesn't make any difference. And Ray Kraft, I've thanked him ever since, Mike, but Ray Kraft found him. There wasn't anybody within 3 feet of him when he went up for a layup. And the ball rolled around and came out. And they went down and tied the game. We had 48 seconds to go. I get across the 10-second line, and they let me stand there until there were 18 seconds to go. We called timeout, and if you follow the coach's instructions, everything turns out well, right? Here's what happened. Woody was always calm. He never raised his voice, and he said, okay, here's what we're going to do. He says, now, Kraft, you take it out and throw it to Bob, me. And he said, Bob, you just dribble around till there are 5 or 6 seconds to go, and then you can make your move, try to shoot, and leave enough time in case you miss it. Maybe we could tip it in. Gene White, our starting center, said, well, if we're going to do that, Woody, why don't we get on the left side and clear that? Woody said, that's a good idea. That's what we'll do. I said, let's go over it again. He says, Kraft, you take it out and throw it to Bob. Guess who took the ball out of bounds?
Bobby.
I did. But when you hit the winning shot, nobody says anything about that.
No, it doesn't matter. And look at it like this. If you wouldn't have had your worst game, y'all might have won by 15, and, then it wouldn't have been as big a deal.
No, it wouldn't have been a big a deal. I mean, everybody talked about this thing forever.
Yeah, and once you win that game, what was that night like? I assume you guys stayed in Indianapolis and you came home the next day?
We did stay in Indianapolis. You're so tired after those. You play 2 games. Here, to win the state tournament back then, we played 20 games during the season, I think. Maybe 21. I think it was 20. And to win the tournament, in the sectional, you have to win at least 3 games, 1 during the week, and then every Saturday from then on, for 4 straight Saturdays, you play 2 games if you win. So you had to win 9 games in a month, and we played 20 games from November 15th to March the 1st. So it's a very grueling test. And we were so tired. Oh, here's what happened before we went up to play Muncie Central. And this was a big deal to us. when you go to the semi-state in Indianapolis, they assign a motorcycle policeman to you, and he leads you through all the red lights to go out to Butler Fieldhouse back then to play.
Yeah.
Pat Stark was his name. He requested us again in '54, and he's in the dressing room with us all the time. He's in all our pictures. He told us, he said, fellas, before you go up to this game tonight, if you win this championship, I'm going to turn the sirens on. We'll go back downtown and go around the circle the wrong way. And he did. Almost got fired. So we did that. And then, I don't know, maybe we had something to eat, but we're tired. We went to bed, went to church the next day, drove down to Milan. And we didn't go by school bus.
Oh, yeah, you had the cars, didn't you? Was it Chris Volts?
We had a GM dealer in Milan called Chris Volts.
Yeah.
Chris Volts Motors gave us Oldsmobiles for the regional, Buicks for the semi-state, and Cadillacs for the state tournament both years. So we're driving our Cadillacs back, and this is how much interest there was in the state tournament. We get to Sunman, 9 miles from Milan. Cars are parked along the side of the road, and people are walking. And we thought there was an accident up there. They had state police in Milan because they closed all the businesses. Everybody left and went to Indianapolis. The state police estimated between 30 and 40,000 people came through Milan that day to greet the state tournaments. Then this is a day after the state tournament.
Yeah.
They were parked 9 miles out and walking. Tom Colmar and his wife were behind us, and when we stalled, he told his wife, he said, I'm going to walk. And he's 9 miles out now. He got to Milan before she did in the car. They came from 5 states, well, 4 surrounding states, and Indiana. And that's just how it was. I mean, you can't get 30,000 people in a town of 1,100. It doesn't work.
Yeah. And by this point, do you guys realize what you did and how big it was and what it meant to so many people?
We had no idea. We really didn't. I mean, we thought it was a big deal. We got out of school a day or two, and it afforded an opportunity for all of us to have an opportunity to go to college and further our education and hopefully make better people of us. Only one of us possibly could have afforded. I know I couldn't. I was the last of 6 kids, and there was no way I could have gone to college without the scholarship. I turned down IU, Purdue, Michigan State, Cincinnati, Tennessee, and 30 other colleges to go to Butler, and which was a great decision. I figured I could play. I knew the Hinkle system, and I set single games and career scoring records while I was at Butler, and had an opportunity to play later. Turned down. By the way, the NBA wasn't anything like it is now either.
The Phillips 66ers that you played for were, heck, you had Bob Kerwin back in the late 40s, early 50s. They were legit. I think in 48 and a few of those years, they were actually the Olympic team for the United States.
And they were in 56 also.
Yeah.
And you become the Olympic team, there's an Olympic tournament. I didn't know that. I'd never heard of Phillips 66 before I got there. And I got there because of Mr. Hinkle. I was selected to the East-West All-Star game my senior year at Butler, 12 from the East, 12 from the West. My roommate was Archie Dees, IU, number 1 draft choice in the NBA. Now, number 1 draft choice in the NBA. You want to guess what his offer was?
What was it?
$8,000 a year. Teachers were signing for $4,500.
Yeah.
If that gives you a little impression. Now, he's number 1. I would have made maybe $4,000 with either the Hawks or the Lakers. And the NBA had 8 teams. Furthest west was Minneapolis, and then St. Louis. They had teams in Fort Wayne, Syracuse, New York, Rochester, New York, Philadelphia, New York City. The NIBL, which is what Phillips was involved with, we had 9 teams, I found out. We had teams in New York. Cleveland was owned by George Steinbrenner, Akron Goodyear, Denver DC Truckers, Seattle Buchanan Bakers, San Francisco Investors, Wichita Vickers, an oil company out of Wichita, obviously, Peoria Caterpillars, and Phillips 66. And you're right. 58, Bud Browning was my coach at Phillips. He came back. He coached the 48 Olympic team. If you win the Olympic playoff, you get automatically 5 players, and you're noted as the team for the Olympics for the United States. You can have as many as 7. Phillips won it in 48, 56. Peoria Caterpillars won it in 52. In 60, we won our league, and that qualified us for the Olympic playoffs, and it was the first year they allowed other than college seniors to play on the college all-star team. Well, the college seniors that year were Oscar Robertson and Jerry West, a guy named Jerry Lucas and John Havlicek, Walt Bellamy, Terry Dischinger, and only 2 of them were seniors. The others were underclassmen. We drew them the first game of the Olympic playoffs, and they beat us 11 points. So that eliminated us from extending the National Industrial Basketball League as a representative. But it was a great time. We played a 48-game league schedule. We toured the United States for our jobbers, did exhibition games. We represented the United States in the Middle East for 7 weeks, traveling around teaching basketball. We were in Mexico for 5 weeks for the State Department. And I got there simply on Mr. Hinkle's word. Here's how he was respected. In the East-West All-Star game, and back then they had the College All-Star Globetrotter game. Abe Saperstein's calling Archie. He's calling me, and we can make $100 a game, $1,800. Dad made $3,200 all year. Mr. Hinkle, I can make $1,800. He said, Bob, that's a lot. You had to know Mr. Hinkle. He had fish hooks in his pockets, but he said, that's a lot of money, Bob. But I have an appointment for you in Bartlesville, Oklahoma with Phillips. I didn't ask him why. I never heard of him.
Yeah.
So I turned it down. Archie turned it down because McCracken told him that making him pro and he'd have no bargaining rights with the NBA. He signed with Denver in our league and waited 2 weeks before the season started. Instead of $8,000, they gave him $12,000. I go to Phillips. The only people there is Bud Browning, the coach, and Gib Ford, the assistant. I shoot for 10 minutes, and Bud says, take a shower. All I could see was $1,800 coming out of that shower room. I come out, and Bud said, we'd like to offer you a position. Well, after it was all over, I was his assistant coach when we were in the Middle East. And I said, Bud, how did you hire me? They never saw a film. They never saw me play. I shoot for 10 minutes, and they hire me. He said, while you were showering, I called Lou Wilkie, who was vice president of Phillips Petroleum Company and a member of the AAU committee, and he was on the rules committee with Mr. Hinkle. He said, while you were showering, I called Lou Wilkie, and he said, I told him, I said, you know, this Plump kid can shoot, and he's pretty fast, but he's awful small. Lou Wilkie said, if Mr. Hinkle said he could play, hire him. His word alone.
Yeah. Tony Hinkle was a great basketball coach.
Oh, he was only at Butler from 1920 to 1970. And from 1936 until 1970, when he retired, he was head football, head baseball, head basketball, and athletic director.
Yeah. And
I also played 4 years of baseball for him.
Yeah. And if it wasn't for Milan in 1954, none of that happens. And unfortunately, the way it looks, there can never be another Milan 1954. And the interesting thing that makes it even more special, if you look at Milan basketball, I think their only sectional championships were what, like 73, 80, and 85 after that?
I'm not sure they won it in 80. I think it was 73 and 85, and the coach in 85 was Gene White, who was a center on our
Yeah.
team.
Because I remember,
Yep.
let's see, they lost to, I think, Richmond and Woody Austin in that game. And I think they'd upset
Yes,
East
they
Central,
did.
which was like 1,000 kids in the sectional championship. And in 80, I think they'd lost to South Dearborn in the first round in a regional. And then South Dearborn lost to Connorsville that night. Because that was actually, I was like 7th or 8th grade. But yeah, the fact that didn't even get close again, it's kind of like the Indiana State thing. Larry Bird was there, this happened. But with you guys, it was more than a one-man team. You guys had some great players. And the movie Hoosiers, when you first heard about that movie, I've always had this question, and I've talked to Angelo Pizzo and never even asked him, but was there ever any interest in doing the story how it actually happened?
No, I don't think so. I've talked with Angelo, and he didn't come out and say that he didn't want to make it after the Milan thing. The actual thing, there needed to be some controversy in it.
Yeah, a little conflict never hurts.
Yeah. I said if he would have talked to me, I'd have had controversy. Damn, coach kicked me off when I was home. But no, they didn't make it exactly like the movie, but they did pattern it after the 53-54 team. Basically,
don't you think
54.
they kind of patterned it over all of Indiana high school basketball in the 50s and just took a little bit of piece from everything?
Well, there's no question that it was about the 1950s and 60s. Yeah, Angelo grew up in Bloomington, Indiana. David Anspaugh grew up in Decatur, Indiana. They lived the stories, and he did ask me about the last 18 seconds. He wanted to know where the shot was from, and they made that. If you watch the actual game of Milan Muncie Central and the last 18 seconds after the ball is thrown in the movie Hoosiers, it's identical.
Well, and the thing is this, it wasn't just a movie that made it big. I remember being in Daytona Beach, Florida in 1978 in a pool on a vacation. And there was a man from New York there. And we all start talking, and he asked where I'm from. And I said, I'm from Aurora, Indiana. And he goes, is that anywhere near Milan? He said, because my dad always told me about the 1954 Milan Indians. So then we talked about that. Yep. And I remember growing up, it was a big deal to me because my dad was friends with your student manager, Fred Bushing.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember Fred telling all these stories about all these games.
Fred is also, by the way, from Pierceville, Indiana.
Okay, I either didn't know that or didn't remember it because I know Fred's been gone for a while. But yeah, he used to own a bunch of different properties, and me and my dad would go fish on them. But my dad really liked that guy, and I just remember the stories, and I remember the pictures. I was the only person looking for the manager on the picture because I knew Fred, and Fred was Fred was a great guy.
He was a great guy. Yeah, he's still around. He's in Florida. Yeah,
is he?
Oh, yeah. There's only three of our players there's only three players deceased. Both season managers are still alive.
Okay. I knew he wasn't around here anymore, but my dad passed away like 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
So.
No, your dad passed away, you say?
Yeah, about 7 or 8 years ago. So I didn't know what had happened to Fred, to tell you the truth.
No, Fred's still around. Four of us were from Pierceville. Myself, Gene White, starting center, Roger Schroeder, assistant sub guard, and Glenn Butts was a sophomore, and then Fred Bushing. And nobody from Pierceville had ever lettered in basketball before. It was just an unusual time.
Have you ever thought about asking the Pacers to just wear some Milan jerseys for Hickory Night?
No.
But
The Hoosiers will go. You know, you talked about the guy from New York. Mentioned that in place close to Milan. That the museum in Milan was started by Rosal McKittrick, who was from Iowa, moved to Milan in '55. She married a guy from there, McKittrick. She opened that museum in a corner of her antique shop in 1998. From 1990, they raised $350,000. By the way, 4 years ago, June.
It's a great
renovated
museum
the old Milan
too.
State Bank building,
Yeah,
and they have had visitors from all 50 states and 39 foreign countries, including Saudi Arabia, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, that have visited that museum.
yeah, and it's a great museum. And I actually thought about going there today before I did this interview, but we had to pick up my granddaughter. But yeah, it's
Oh, life gets in the way sometimes, doesn't
oh,
it,
it's
Mike?
not really getting in the way. It's my granddaughters. My wife's in there trying to keep them quiet right now. But they live in Milan, so I'm hoping one of them plays basketball. It won't be the same thing though, Bobby, because it can never be the same thing again. And that's the thing that I find most bothersome. It's not the fact people always say, well, only one small school did that. Well, I think you had Wingate in 1911. But it's not the fact that only one school did that. It was the fact that every school had a chance to do that, and that I had a friend who had a daughter on the 2000 Rising Sun team that played for the Class A state championship. And I'm talking to him, and he's saying this isn't as big a deal as when Rising Sun beat South Dearborn to win the sectional for the first time in 1984 or 1983, whatever year it was.
I was just going to tell you the sectional was more important than the state tournament back then.
Oh yeah,
And the
because
county
that was
tournament
bragging
was
rights.
more important. Yep. And there are people that will be talking about their sectional wins long after they forget the class basketball. Now, I want to make one thing clear, Mike. I mean, it's still a great accomplishment to be a state champion. I
Yeah.
don't care if it's multi-class or not. But there isn't the interest. There's not the following. And that's unfortunate for the kids, in my viewpoint. That's why I was against going to the multi-class tournament. And I think it's a detriment to the students themselves and for the fans. But I'm proud of every one of them that can win a state championship. That's a great accomplishment.
Yeah,
There's
and
no
nobody's
way.
trying to take it away. I'm just
No.
it's not the same. I mean, I don't remember. I think I went to a game at the local school here, which was a gym that seats 4,500 like 4 or 5 years ago. There's like 300 kids there. So my kids, or at least my daughter, when she was like maybe 14 and my son was like 6 or somewhere around there, they played a sectional game at South Dearborn, which seats 4,500. And Connorsville was playing, and they had the Howard kid that went to Butler. They were playing Batesville, who had Colt Ryan, who ended up going to Evansville.
Yep.
And I decided to take my kids to this game. And my daughter's like, why? Is Connorsville and Batesville? I said, yeah, but tonight you're going to get to see what Indiana high school basketball used to be. And we go in that gym, and it's the first game, and there's 4,500 people, and they're going absolutely nuts. The game goes to like double overtime. Howard fouled out. I think Connorsville lost, either that or Ryan fouled out. The point is, they got to feel what that was like. Now, when that
Yep.
game ended, the next game was the home team, South Dearborn, playing, I think, Franklin County. By the time they tipped that off, me and the kids had left because there was only like 300 people left. Everybody from Connorsville and Batesville got the hell out of there.
Yeah, and that didn't happen before. You know,
No.
that I mean, it was, but you know, it is what it is, and it is unfortunate. I mean, it really is. Yeah, maybe you don't. I'll tell you a couple of things. This was supposed to be a 2-year experiment when they went to the multi-class.
Yeah.
They said, we'll just do it for 2 years and see if it works. Well, we formed Friends of Hoosier Hysteria, and we asked the IHSAA. I knew Bob Gardner. He was principal of Milan before he was elevated to the assistant of the assistant commissioner, Ray Kraft recommended him. Ray Kraft had been there since 1985. Bob Gardner used to come in and ask Ray what the rules were and what should we do about this. But we asked them, if it is an experiment for 2 years, what criteria are you going to use? And Bob said, well, we're going to look at everything. And I said, well, if attendance decreases and if revenues go down, will you change it? And he said, well, we're just going to look at everything. And I said, if it's a 2-year experiment, how can it be an experiment if you don't have some criteria? He said, we're going to look at everything. Well, after the 2-year experiment, we asked them if they did a financial impact study, and they refused to do that. So we did one that would have cost us $45,000. We got a break on it. Randy Effner, who was in an accounting firm here in Indianapolis, had audited the books of Illinois High School Association for 7 years, so he knew what he was doing. We projected a $350,000 loss. They lost $500,000. So I come out in the paper and said, well, they're going to go back. I knew they weren't going to, but I said they were obviously going to go back. They lost $500,000. Bob Gardner came out and said, we didn't lose $500,000. We had a decrease of revenue of $500,000. Maybe somebody lost it, but we didn't.
Yeah.
Now, does that make any sense?
No,
I mean, come on.
It doesn't. I mean,
they refused to put a format of the tournament out before they went to it. They never put a format out before. They supposedly did an 18-month study and went to these neighboring states that had multi-class, and right in the middle of their 18-month study, it says if you go to more than 3 classes, it won't work. So we drew out the 3-class tournament and had it on the big boards, and TV station came out to Plump's Last Shot restaurant. It was on TV. 2 weeks after that televised, they went to 4 classes and refused to put that format out also.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It was just crazy.
Yeah, and they tried the tournament champions thing, which bombed big time too. I think the first 2 years.
Oh, how can you be a champion 1 year and you can't do it the next week? You're not a champion. I mean, that was a doom for failure to begin with.
Yeah, you can't have a team that wins a state championship have to play a game the next week and lose.
Yeah, I mean, come on.
And the thing I remember, is the games, at least that first year, were not blowouts either when the bigger school played the smaller school. So I don't know why they did it. I don't think, is there any chance it could go back to the way it was?
Well, I know why. No, they're not. They'll never go back. There are more small school principals than there are large schools, and there are no coaches on the board anymore. It was voted down 17-0 in 1989. I think it was 89, 88, somewhere in there. But of the 14 members, 13 of them were ex-coaches. Those that wanted multi-class said, we lost the battle, but we'll win the war. They got their people on the board. And besides all of the information that said it won't work, they were going to do it anyway because the small schools wanted champion behind their name. And Bob Gardner, I'll swear, sold his soul to those that wanted multi-class basketball. And I know 2 guys that changed their vote, that told Ray Kraft they were voting for him. Now, you got a right to change your vote, but you should tell the guy. Yeah. Elmer Stropman is one of them from Rising Sun. He not only told Ray he was voting for him to be commissioner, he told Gene White, who was a fraternity brother of his at Franklin College, and we played against Elmer every year he was at Rising Sun. He did not tell Ray he was going to change his vote. The other one's from North Vernon. I can't remember his name now. Ray walked into the meeting knowing he was elected. We didn't have a great school at Milan, but, I mean, he could count. He thought he was elected commissioner. Those 2 guys changed their vote without telling him, and Bob Gardner is elected 9-8. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure out what happened.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, the other thing that kind of killed it, whether it was good or bad overall for education, but was the consolidation that really kicked into gear mid to late 70s, because I think it took away a lot of the community pride. It actually kicked into gear in the 60s, but
But it's still last year of the single class tournament. I think they drew something like 850,000 people to our tournament. The first year of the multi-class, they drew something like 385,000, and it hadn't been back there since. Now that tells you something.
Yeah, and there were still small schools that were doing stuff. You remember L&M with the Oliphant boys?
Sure.
They actually
Absolutely.
were in Sports Illustrated. And then that last year, you had the Batesville team with Michael Menser that lost, I think, in overtime to Newcastle at Newcastle. And I remember ESPN and Sports Illustrated were there to cover that.
You don't see them anymore.
No, you don't. Unfortunately.
Yes, it is, unfortunately. And I think it's a detriment, I'll say it again, to the young athletes and the young people in school. I just think it's a detriment. They're missing something. But it is what it is, and it's not going to change.
Well, I can tell you this. My son's a pretty good basketball player. He only played his freshman year, and then I took him over to Ohio to play football at a private school because basketball didn't interest him. I guarantee you, if it was like it was when I was growing up, he'd probably go on to play.
Oh,
he'd be going to college to play basketball instead of football.
Yep.
And that's what I told him.
I firmly believe that. Yeah.
But I don't know. We just sound like two old farts complaining that everything was better when we were younger. But it's just true, Bobby.
No, it's not that everything was better when we were younger. I mean, there's a lot of things today that supposedly are better than what we had, but it was different.
Yeah.
The athletes weren't pampered back then, and they weren't put on a pedestal. And I see that happening some today, and that's unfortunate, but it is what it is. And again, congratulations to those that are able to win the championship. It's still a great accomplishment.
Yeah. And also, I wanted to give you a plug for your restaurant because Kent Sterling, who I do the Indiana Hoosiers Basketball Weekly show with, said that you guys had the best bluegill sandwich he's ever had.
Well, we had bluegill. We ran out of that supply, but USA Today divided the United States into 5 regions, and our region, we were voted the number 1 tenderloin sandwich in our region by USA Today, and it is the best tenderloin, honestly, that you'll ever have.
Yeah, I know Kent loved the bluegill. I don't know how long ago he had it there, but he said that the food there was great.
That's been some time ago. Yeah.
That's been some time ago. Kent's old, too, so...
Yeah, but that breaded tenderloin's got a special breading on it, and it's got real meat in it. Everybody raves about it. But I appreciate the plug. Come up and see it sometime. My office is a block and a half from there. I'll come down and visit with you.
All right. Sounds good, Bobby. I really appreciate you coming on the show because we're doing this every week. If the listeners out there and you got somebody that won a sectional in Dillsboro or wherever or a regional and they want to come on and talk about it, we want to give them a place to talk about it because I think these are stories that people need to hear because, like I said, if you're 40 or over, you understand the significance. And I like to hear stuff like that. So we just thought the best person to start this show off with was you, Bobby. And I really want to thank you for coming on.
Mike, I appreciate you thinking about me, and I hope the fans enjoy it, and good luck with your show. And if I can help anytime, you let me know.
All right, Bobby. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care now.
All right.
Bye.
You too. All right, guys, remember you can hear all of our shows on iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify. We will be back next week with Dave Magley, who was the Indiana Mr. Basketball, I believe, in 1978, of 78 or 79, and went on to play at the University of Kansas. So Dave Magley will be next week on Wednesday night, hopefully Wednesday night. We got to get the date and time set up with him yet. But you can follow us on Twitter at Grueling Truth for all updates for when the shows will be on. And like I said, drop us a line, thegruelingtruth@gmail.com, or you could send us a message at Grueling Truth. If you know anybody on that wants to talk about their high school, we're going to have some guys on to talk about a team we talked about earlier tonight, the 1977 Aurora Red Devils, who made it to the Final Eight, almost made it to the Final Four as a small school. So anybody you got there, make sure you drop me a line. We'll have them on. So for now, for Bobby Plump, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.